Good afternoon, all the guests and the facilitator of today's interactive session, Shri Hemant Gupta sir from BSE Social Stock Exchange. Sir, we are honored to have you with us for interacting with our members with regard to their queries on the registration and listing of social organizations on the BSE platform. This program is being facilitated by ICMAI Social Auditors Organization. We have been organizing various programs for examination and also for those who are aspirants for this particular career going forward. We are celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav this year, and India's economy is today 3.75 trillion strong, and we are the 5th largest economy of the world. That's one part of the story. On the other side, of course, there's a lot of work still required to be done for achieving what we are cherishing in terms of building a $5 trillion economy, or even going forward, why not 10 trillion going forward still more. And in this context, social sector would play a very, very important role. And that's where the government's thinking has been to promote the concept and the platform of social stock exchange with a view to providing a structured regulatory architecture for the NPOs and the FPs to get registered, listed, raise funds, but of course also subject to certain regulatory compliances as prescribed by SEBI and other regulatory bodies from time to time. So the whole process has started off, and ICMAI Social Auditors Organization has started functioning over the period of last about 4-5 months. We have already enrolled quite a few number of social auditors. We have been conducting professional development orientation programs for various stakeholders. And in continuation of that, it is our privilege and honor to have with us Shri Hemant Gupta, who is head of BSE Social Stock Exchange, to interact with our members and other stakeholders with regard to formalities, various queries, various doubts that people have in their mind, how to register, what is the process, things like that. So welcome, Shri Hemant Gupta, sir, to this interactive session. Over to you, sir, for opening remarks. We have already received some questions from some of our members, which I'll put up. And subsequently, all the guests are also invited to raise their queries now. Right now, live, you can raise your hand and you can raise a query, which I'll put up to Shri Gupta, sir, and request him to kindly address to that query. Over to Gupta, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. S.K. Gupta, ICMI, for having me. It's always an honor and a privilege to talk about a topic that's very close to my heart, which is the social stock exchange. What I'll do is just to set the context of our conversation for the remaining 55 minutes. I'll walk the audience through a brief presentation on the social stock exchange and how it works, including the background, and then we can get into questions and answers. So let me try sharing my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
so, okay. So just a quick background on the social stock exchange. In terms of timelines, July 2019, in the interim budget shortly after the elections, the Honorable Finance Minister announced setting up of a social stock exchange. And there were two key things that I'd like to point out in this regard in her announcement. One was that it would be under the regulatory ambit of SEBI, or the capital markets regulator. And the second was that it would be for listing of social enterprises and voluntary organizations. In other words, for-profit and not-for-profit organizations working in the social development domain. What SEBI did is, post this announcement, can people go on mute, please? If you're not talking, thank you. So in September 2019, SEBI constituted a working committee, which submitted its report in June 2020.
All the guests are requested to kindly mute themselves, please. All the guests are requested to kindly mute, please. Thank you. Kindly mute yourself, please.
Okay. The report of the working committee was shortly followed by the formation of a technical group that took the workings of the working committee and converted that into operational details on how the social stock exchange would operate. Their report was submitted in May of 2021. And then in starting in July 2022, the government and SEBI started issuing notifications with regard to the working of the social stock exchange. But before we get into the working committee and the technical group, what I thought I'll share with all of you is a global context on the social stock exchange. It's not the first time in the world that such a stock exchange is being set up. There are actually 7 countries who before us had set up a social stock exchange, right? And you can see on your screen the 7 countries. The ones in green are the ones that are still operational, whereas the ones in orange are the ones that are no longer functional. In brackets is given the nature of the enterprise they were supporting. NPO standing for not-for-profit organizations or NGOs, and FP standing for for-profit enterprises. You'll quickly notice that almost actually all the surviving social stock exchanges were the ones catering to the for-profit enterprises, and the ones that address the not-for-profit segment no longer are functional. These social stock exchanges also structurally can be grouped into the following categories. 5 of them were matchmaking platforms. In other words, they would there'll be like a directory of social enterprises, and donors or investors could look up their organizations and their projects. There wasn't really a stock exchange as such. There was no fundraising on the platform. And 2 of them were what we call alternate investment, or in other words, they were platforms on which, usually using bond kind of instruments, entities could raise funds, the other thing you will notice is that in all cases, the social stock exchange was not a part of the stock exchange ecosystem. It was a separate platform. Thirdly, it would either address NPOs or FPs that we saw in the previous chart. In case of matchmaking, obviously, there was no trading because it was a purely directory listing kind of a function. Whereas in case of the alternate investment, there was a limited amount of trading that also happened. And the countries are given below. So what we did is, when we went about creating the Indian Social Stock Exchange, we tried to pick as many learnings as possible, both from the social stock exchanges or SSCs that survived, as well as the ones that did not survive. Right. So on your screen, you will see summary of the working committee and the technical group reports. Keep in mind each of these reports was 70+ pages, and I've tried to take out the key items. Obviously, I've left out a lot. So the idea is to focus on what I've mentioned on the screen. The first thing the working committee did was that the SSC will not be a separate stock exchange. It will be a segment under the existing stock exchanges. Why this is important is that thereby the SSC would inherit the governance and the compliance frameworks and the fundraising frameworks that exist on the on the stock exchanges today. Second, recognizing the fact that the stock exchange or the capital markets is something completely new, especially for the not-for-profit enterprises and for donors. They propose setting up a capacity building fund so that NGOs as well as donors and investors could be educated on what the social stock exchange was about and how to leverage it and build capacity around that. The current status of the capacity building fund is it has been constituted under NABARD and it shortly will be operational. The third thing, the third key thing that the working committee did was that, recognizing the fact that today, especially on the NGO side, funding is typically through donations or grants. Creating an instrument on the stock exchange called the zero coupon, zero principal instrument, or a ZCZP instrument, as a means of fundraising through donations or grants. Zero coupon meaning there's no interest, zero principal meaning that you don't get the principal amount that you put in back. In other words, nothing but a donation or a grant. What the technical group did was it created the operational procedures for the SSC. And one of the first things they said is that for any enterprise, so for-profit or not-for-profit, wanting to come onto the SSC, they have to prove something called the primacy of social intent. In other words, that social impact is their key mandate. Okay, and I'll get into how this is proven. Also, just like any other commercial enterprise on the stock exchange, given that the purpose behind a social enterprise is social impact, also introduced the concept of impact-related disclosures. Third, and this is some of you guys are already familiar with this, formalize the role of a social auditor or a social evaluator. A person, just like a financial auditor communicates financial results, a third-party verified financial results of a listed company, a social assessor or a social auditor would communicate the social outcomes or impact being created by an enterprise on the SSC, thereby providing transparency to investors or donors who put in money into these enterprises on the SSC, right? And last but not the least, there was a category 1 alternate investment fund that SEBI had called the Social Venture Fund. We also recommended certain changes to it to make it more friendly for being constituted and being funded on the social stock exchange. Okay. So what happened is, as a result of all these workings and reports, like I mentioned earlier, starting in July, the Ministry of Finance and SEBI came out with notifications and circulars giving substance to how the social stock exchange would function. The first was the Ministry of Finance notification declaring ZCZP as a security, and therefore it could come on the stock exchange. And the others dealt with the disclosures, listing requirements, as well as a governing council for the social stock exchange. Okay. This is a slide that details on why is a social stock exchange important. I will skip this one. I'll just leave it on for a couple of minutes for you guys to absorb what's on the slide, but we'll not spend too much time on this. I do want to get into the operational details quickly. Okay, so this is how the social stock exchange works. Okay. Like I had mentioned earlier, first, any enterprise wanting to come onto the SSC has to establish primacy of social intent. Once you've established, and again, I'll spend a little bit of time on what that means. Once you have established the primacy of social intent, then depending on whether you're not-for-profit organization or a for-profit enterprise, the paths would diverge. For a for-profit enterprise, given that there already exists a thriving ecosystem around commercial enterprises in the two stock exchanges, we did not reinvent the wheel or change anything for for-profit enterprises. They would follow the normal route any other enterprise would take as far as the stock exchange is concerned. In other words, they could list in one of the three segments that the stock exchanges have, the main board, the SME segment, or the startup segment, depending on their net worth and their liquidity requirements. They could raise money through equity or debt or through mutual funds. We also, of course, added something, the social venture funds that I spoke about, and something called social development bonds, SDB, and I'll spend also 2 minutes on what is an SDB. The story on the not-for-profit side, however, is a lot more interesting because obviously before this, no NGO had come onto the stock exchange. And here, what we did is we actually broke up the process into two parts. The first step being an NGO gets registered. And again, I'll talk about what that process entails. And once you're registered, you can then raise funds through either zero coupon, zero principal or ZCZP instruments or social impact funds. Okay. The reason why, unlike on the for-profit side where you directly go to fundraising, the reason why it was broken up into two steps was recognizing the fact that NGOs by and large, not always, but mostly raise funds at a program or a project level, and therefore would need to come to the stock exchange multiple times to raise funding at that program or project level. Let them register once and then come as many times as they want to raise funds. Okay. So how do each of these boxes work? What I will do is I'll actually focus mostly on the left side because that is what is new. The right side, like I said, is the existing enterprise structure for raising funds on the stock exchange. So let's start with establishing primacy of social intent. There are 4 filters here, 3 key ones and 1 additional one. The first filter is that you have to be working in a sector that has been identified as a social development sector. Okay. These sectors, these 15 broad areas, which are now on your screen, essentially are a combination of Schedule 7 of Section 135 or the CSR Act, the SDG goals, and Niti Aayog priority areas. In addition, we also added some more new age social development sectors like bridging the digital divide, promoting welfare of migrants also to this list. Okay. And these lists are available on the SEBI website as well as the BSE website, BSE Social Stock Exchange website. So first filter, you have to be working in one or more of these 15 areas. Second filter, you must have at least 2/3 of your work in these 15 areas, right? This 2/3 is measured by either your revenue, if you're a for-profit enterprise, or by expenses of beneficiary, if you're not for-profit enterprise. The third filter is that certain organizations are currently barred from being on the social stock exchange, and I'm stressing the word currently. Things will change as we evolve. And these organizations are the ones with political or religious affiliations, corporate foundations which get bulk of their funding from a parent corporate body, professional or trade bodies, and infrastructure and housing companies, except those in affordable housing. Additionally, the enterprise should be working, of course, with the underserved or less privileged population or regions that are recording a lower performance in the development priorities, right? So step 1, you have to cross this hurdle of establishing primacy of social intent. Once you've crossed this hurdle, then now we'll go down the NPO path of this flowchart. Okay. For an NPO to come onto the social stock exchange, there is an eligibility criteria which has broadly been derived from, again, Section 135, and normally what a donor would ask in terms of proposals. So the NPO must be a society, trust, or Section 8 company, must have a track record of 3 years, must have a valid 12A ATG, etc., must have a ATG. In addition, 2 requirements were added from a size perspective. Okay, and these were keeping in mind. So the first requirement is must have a minimum of 50 lakh annual spending in the last financial year or the prior financial year. And this was primarily keeping in mind that coming onto the stock exchange does require additional compliances, disclosures, etc. And the organization should be big enough to be able to have the resources to comply with these requirements. So that's the genesis behind the 50 lakh amount. And the second is, remember that a stock exchange does not do fundraising. It facilitates fundraising. The organization should have the capability of raising funds and therefore should have raised a minimum of 10 lakhs in the previous financial year. Okay. So if you are somebody who meets these criteria, you can then come on to this to the BSE's portal. NSE has a similar portal where you can register your interest. This is the URL. It's straightforward, https://www.bsesocialstockexchange.com. Once you register your interest, within 2 to 3 days, we will revert with login details to our portal, as well as a checklist of documents to be submitted. And then you can complete the question, upload the documents, and pay the registration fee, which is 5,000 rupees. And we will review the documentation and come back to you with any queries. And if everything is okay, your registration will be granted. Now that so let's go back to that flowchart. Now you're registered yourself now. Now you're ready to do fundraising. So we'll start by on how do you do fundraising using a zero coupon, zero principal instrument. So you send us an email at this email address, ssc@bscindia.com. We shall respond with the documentation required, including an offer document, which is similar to a draft red herring prospectus. So it has the objectives of the project for which the funds are being raised, timelines, budgets, expected outcomes, risk factors that may impact the project, etc. And once you furnish the required documentation, we'll review it, revert with any clarification changes. And once the documentation review has been completed on the basis of the regulations, we will open the issue for investments, and investors can start putting in money into the zero coupon, zero principal instrument, ZCZP. So let's talk a little bit about the characteristics of a ZCZP. Again, I'm spending a little bit of time on ZCZP because it's something new. Minimum issue size is 1 crore. So you have to be raising at least 1 crore fund using the ZCZP. Minimum donor subscription amount is 2 lakhs. Like anything else on the stock exchange, this issue will also be in a DMAT form. Minimum issue subscription required is 75%. And zero coupon, zero principal, or ZCZP being the equivalent of a donation or a grant. Once the object for which funds were raised has been achieved or the tenor has been completed, the ZCZP will terminate. And of course, there's no financial return here, only a social return. Similarly, social impact fund or SIFs, like I said earlier, alternate investment fund category 1. The key thing is that these invest primarily in securities, units, or partnership interest of social ventures or securities of social enterprises. There are social units issued to its investors who get social returns, no financial returns. We don't anticipate any trading because there's no financial value. But if there is a way to monetize the social return, then we could start trading. But currently there's no methodology for monetizing social returns. There are already SIFs that exist even before the SSC went live. So these SIFs may invest 25% of their funds on the social stock exchange listed securities. The new SIFs will have to invest 100% of their funds in securities of NPOs registered or listed on the social stock exchange. Let's spend 2 minutes on the social development bond concept. So some of you may be familiar with this, but for the others, a social development bond essentially is a tripartite agreement between 3 parties. The intermediary in the middle, this is the party that's like a coordination agency that pulls together a social development project. And I'll give you a hypothetical example. Let's say they identify a project of providing clean drinking water to 10 villages in a particular district. And let's say the cost of doing this clean drinking water to these villages is about 1 crore. And in that 1 crore, they expect that they'll be able to supply fresh, clean drinking water to 80% of the households in those 10 villages. And I'm just making this up, so please. So what they will do is they will approach an investor, in this case called a risk investor, whose job it will be to provide the 1 crore capital required to execute the project. In return, the intermediary or the coordinating agency will give a financial return to this investor. And let's say for ease of calculation, that is a 7% rate of return. So, and let's say it's a 1-year project, 1 crore provided by the risk investor at the beginning of the project, which is this fund flow number 1. Okay. Now, the agreement between the intermediary and the risk investor is that at the end of the 1 year, the risk investor will get their 1 crore back plus the 7% interest. However, there's a condition. The condition is that the outcome that has been promised by the intermediary, which is at least 80% of the households will get clean drinking water, has to be achieved. If that outcome is not achieved, then the risk investor will not get anything. So the 7% is the cost that the risk investor is willing to undergo for potential loss of the principal. This 1 crore will be handed down to the various NGOs that will be implementing this project in the 10 villages. And of course, this will get passed on to the households or the beneficiaries. Now, however, remember, there is that 80% outcome that has been promised. So a third party evaluator is appointed who will then survey the beneficiaries to report whether the outcome has been achieved or not. They would report this to a donor or an outcome funder. Okay, it's basically a donor called an outcome funder because they would give the money to the intermediary only if the outcome has been achieved. So it's a donation agency, a typical donor. But the advantage that these donor has is that they are providing money only for assured impact or assured outcome. If no outcome, then no money also given. Okay. However, the intermediary and the third party evaluator will have some costs that they would incur in doing all of this activity, right? So the outcome funder will actually give to the intermediary the 1 crore that was spent in doing the project, the 7% or whatever interest the risk investor required, as well as the cost that these two parties have incurred in doing the project. Okay, so that's the flow, and that's a social development bond. Okay. Now, so let's go back to that flow chart. So these were broadly the operational details of the primacy of social intent, registration, listing, ZCZP, social impact fund, as well as SDBs. The other boxes here follow the normal stock exchange route. So I have not spent any time on elaborating on that. Those are established procedures, nothing new. However, what is new is the disclosures. Remember, I spoke about impact-related disclosures in an earlier slide. So this slide attempts to capture the kind of disclosures that need to be made. It is divided into NGOs that are registered but have not raised any funds, NGOs that are listed, which means they've raised funds also, and for-profit enterprises that are listed. As you'll notice, the for-profit enterprises follow the norms of the existing stock exchange, whereas there are some new items on this side. Rather than spending too much time on this particular slide, what I'd like to point out is that what has been introduced is an event-based disclosure. Okay, essentially any event having a material impact on the functioning of the organization if you've not raised funds, and material impact on the organization or the outputs of the project for which you've raised funds have to be reported within 7 days of the event. So as an example, if going back to our drinking water example, right, if there was let's say a flood in some of those villages or some other calamity that happened, because of which the timelines of the project may get extended, or it may actually impact whether the project can go through or not. Those kind of things will have to be reported within 7 days to the SSC. Okay. Last but not the least, I'll also talk a little bit about social auditors, and some of you may be familiar with this already. So essentially, a social auditor is not a financial auditor. They audit social impact or outcomes. And as you guys know, there is a NISM has launched a 11-module course. There are several SROs for social auditors, including those under ICMI. These so self-regulatory organization, empanel, register, lay down standards, as well as take disciplinary action. And we have social audit standards that have been defined by ICAI, ICSI, ICMI, etc. Okay, so that's broadly what I had on the social stock exchange. A quick status update on where we are in this process. So in December of 2022, BSE was granted the license to set up the social SSC segment. We started operations in January. And since then, we've had 16 registered NPOs. At least 4 of them are also actively looking to raise funds, mostly through zero coupon, zero principal, but at least one of them through a social development bond. That's a quick update on where we are. At this point, Dr. S.K. Gupta, I'll hand it back to you for questions, if there are any.
Thank you so much, sir, for your very, very comprehensive and very clear indication of the basic structure proposed and how it's going to function. First, we have certain questions which have already been sent to us by some of the members, guests who are attending this webinar. So I'll take them one by one, sir, and request Mr. Gupta to respond to those questions. And then, of course, we will also take live questions from the audience immediately thereafter. First question is whether there will be any difference in SSC registration with NSC or BSc. I mean, somebody.
Yeah, I think fundamentally there should not be any differences.
Okay.
There may be some difference in the verbiage or some of the documentation that is required to be done, but fundamentally the regulations determine what the eligibility is, what the process is. So there should not be too much of a difference.
Okay, sir. The second question was regarding fees, which you already clarified during your presentation. What is the fees applicable for registration on SSC, either on NSC or BSc? Of course, you can talk about BSc, sir.
Yes, yeah. It was 5,000 rupees as the registration.
5,000 rupees the fee. Okay. And then somebody is asking about the practical procedure, which you again said there is a website, dedicated website on which somebody can visit. And then it provides you all the details of documents required, information required to be provided, everything of that sort. And this is the flow in which the registration can be done and can be sought. Next question is it mandatory for an NGO to get registered on NGO Darpan before registering on SSC?
Yeah. So one of the requirements is to furnish your NGO Darpan ID. So
Okay.
therefore, it is mandatory to register on NGO Darpan.
Okay. How many NPO FPs are registered on BSc till today? You said the number is 15, sir?
16.
50.
No, 16.
16. All the guests are required to kindly mute themselves, please. Thank you. Thank you. Then another question has come on the chat right now. What will be listing fee yearly? This is one time 5,000. And
yeah.
then
so the registration, so the listing fee will depend on the nature of the instrument that you use. So it's different for ZC, ZP, different for SIF, different for SDB. And once you're ready for doing such a listing, then we can have a conversation. It's not very high. I think a zero coupon, zero principal is like 25,000 rupees or something like that.
Okay.
These fees are not at all, there are not at all will be significant enough for you to decide not to do.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. Sure, sir. So another question was how to choose registration to be done, whether BSc or NSC, any specific criteria? So I think it's a matter of individual choice. You broadly said that architecture is more or less the same at both the exchanges, and it's left to the individual as to. And are there some NPOs which have registered at both NSC and BSc, sir?
Yeah, there are several that have registered.
That's what I said. There could also be a possibility of one organization getting listed at both the exchanges.
Yeah.
Why not? Yeah. Okay. Okay, let me see if there are some questions in the chat box. What are the benefits for NPOs for getting themselves registered or listed at Social Stock Exchange?
Okay. So the registration provides a stamp of approval. Several NGOs that have registered have actually indicated that when they've approached funders for funding, the fact that they're registered on the Social Stock Exchange has been an additional stamp of approval of authentication for them, and the donors look at it favorably. Listing, however, there are 3 or 4 things that I want to point out from a listing point of view. One is that so as an NGO, typically you would have a network of donors You would, get money from friends, family, other people in your network. But imagine being able to reach out to all the investors in every corner of the country who can be potential
Yeah.
donors to your projects. The network, which, so if you go back to, the why slide, right? You have access, everybody who's registered and wants to list have access to the same set of investors and funders, right? Without spending too much money. The second is that the whole social audit piece and the disclosures you're doing on this on the social stock exchange will actually help you build a portfolio, a credible portfolio that will not only help you in your current fundraise, but will also set a track record for future fundraisers, right? And third is that, and this is again mentioned on this slide, the fact that today you are getting your funds from a specific set of donors. But as many people have said, the amount of money being raised today in the philanthropic sector is nowhere close to the funds that are actually needed for us to reach our SDG goals or other social development goals. And therefore, we have to unlock larger pools of social capital. And the social stock exchange actually allows you to tap into additional pools of social capital in addition to what you have today. The last but not the least is that some of the things that you cannot do today. So, for example, CSR funds don't typically go to a corpus of an NGO, right? You have trouble raising money for multi-year projects, right? All of that stuff goes away with the social stock exchange, because on the social stock exchange, we don't have any restrictions. You can raise money for anything that you want, as long as there are people who are willing to donate to that particular purpose or cause. So therefore, the restrictions you had earlier also go away. Dr. Gupta, that's how I would answer that.
Thank you, sir. Sure, sir. Thank you. Then somebody is asking, you talked about capacity building fund. So for what purposes can this fund be used? And can NPOs have access to these funds?
So first of all, the capacity building fund is intended for capacity building. Okay. And therefore, I'm not sure what is meant by access to those funds, but they're not meant to be donations or funds that NPOs can use for running projects. Okay. The NABARD is the agency responsible for running this capacity building fund. And I know they're in the process of creating operational procedures and governance procedures. Okay. So once all of that comes out, your question will be answered.
Okay, fine, sir. So in one of your slides, you showed us the international experience that about 8-9 stock exchanges were created in different countries, but as of now, only 3 are operational. So there is a question, why these stock exchanges were not able to continue in the rest of the countries?
See, if you again look at the slide that's on your screen right now, right, the rationale behind set up a social stock exchange. So most of, actually, let me go back to that slide. Most of these social stock exchanges were matchmaking platforms, right? They were directory of listings on which people could list, people could get connected to donors, which really, to my mind, is not a sustainable way of carrying out business. You have to be able to show activity on the platform. The alternate investments one, these two that are surviving, are catering to only for-profit enterprises, right? All the ones that cater to not-for-profit organizations were pure matchmaking platforms. We are not a matchmaking platform. We are actually a fundraising platform. That's one. The second is that even from a fundraising perspective, there was no third-party validation that was put in place, which is what we've instituted through the social audit function. So therefore, when a person is giving money to you, they're actually getting a third-party validation of the quantum of social return that is being earned, right? Which gives greater comfort to the person who's giving money, and that person is likely to come back and give more if their objectives are getting achieved, right? So I think those were some of the areas which other challenges that were faced because of which they were not.
Sir. Yes, sir. Whether ZC, ZP or other instruments on social stock exchange are transferable on SSE platform?
Transferable, yes. Tradable may be a different question.
Okay,
So
but
for
transferable.
example, as an inheritance, you can transfer, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
tradable until and unless we can, create a value, it will
Yes,
not.
yes. How can we pay registration fee? There is no information available on BSc SSC website.
So when you
Somebody would have
register,
tried.
when you
probably.
register your interest,
Okay.
we'll send you what you need to do. Along with that will be a code through which you can pay.
Okay, okay. While trying for registration under the contact details section, we have to write the designation of the contact person, options such as CFO or compliance officer. But currently in our NGO, there is no such CFO or compliance officer. So what should I do?
My recommendation would be that if you are more than 50 lakh rupees a year, you should have a compliance officer. I would
Okay, sir.
recommend that you appoint a compliance officer.
Yes, sir. Yes. We have submitted our application with all required documents without paying the fee, as there was no information available. So some information will go from BSc SSC side indicating
Yeah.
how the fee is required to be paid. So
Yeah,
that's
I'm
procedural.
surprised. Yeah, I'm surprised that has happened. You can send me an email on this email address, hemant.gupta@bscindia.com. I'm
Okay.
assuming you're talking about BSc and not NSC. I can help
Okay.
you with BSc, not with NSC.
Sure, sir. Thank you. What are the expected time period of appointment of third-party evaluator in Indian context?
I think there are enough social auditors now, Dr. S.K. Gupta. You actually might be
Yes,
better.
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There are quite a few of them already operating for a long time in India. It's only of late that we are looking at regulating them, putting them under kind of a formal architecture. But otherwise, there are a whole lot of organizations which have already been doing social audit and social assessment in the marketplace. Yes. Time limit for registration and listing. How much time does it normally take for registration? And
So registration I can talk about. Remember I said we are in conversations, 4 organizations for listing. No listing has happened. For registration, it's taken anything from 4 days to 3 weeks.
okay.
The basic difference has been, if you look at most of the information required is standard information that would be readily available. What is
Yes.
not available normally is the 67%
Yes.
certificate, right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
depending on your relationship with your chartered accountant may take a little longer, but the people who did 4 days had this readily available.
Right.
People who did 3 weeks took time to get this.
Okay, sir. Can CSR funds be used to buy ZC, ZP bonds?
As of now, so I should have clarified this. Neither CSR funds nor FCRA funds are currently permissible on zero coupon,
Okay.
zero principal. And
Okay.
don't call it bonds. Bonds typically signifies a financial return, right? You normally get an interest on bonds, which is why deliberately we call it ZC, ZP instrument.
Yes. Yes, sir. Is a company secretary a mandatory requirement for listed SSC entity?
A compliance officer is,
Compliance officer.
if you appoint your company secretary as a compliance officer, then yeah.
Would the investment in FPE be counted as a CSR activity? No.
Obviously not. These are for-profit enterprises.
Fine. While going through the procedure for registration, we came across this point. If the NPO is dependent on the corporate for more than 50% of its funding, then it shall not be eligible to apply. Please define corporate here. That's what is the question.
Okay, so you see on your screen the entities that are barred, right? And one of them is a corporate foundation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? So any entity which is deriving a majority of its funding from a single corporate body, which is acting like a parent body for this, and usually has control over that body also. What happened?
Okay.
That if you meet that criteria, yeah, you will not be allowed.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Would Goshala be covered as part of the NGO?
I think animal welfare is there, no? I think it should be covered.
Someone is asking that. Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I was saying that animal welfare is covered in the list. I don't know why this. Let me try resharing my screen. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, because I think animal welfare is covered, so it should be there. I don't see a problem.
But actually, that word is not coming out clearly in these 15, this thing. That's
Yeah.
why there were earlier also a lot of queries that we had amongst ourselves. It's not clearly coming out here, sir. This
Dr. Gupta, if you don't mind just dropping me an email, I'll cross check on this.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely, sir. Fine. Thank you. Thank you. Just a minute, yeah. Making amendments in CSR rules and Income Tax Act to provide benefits to the donors of ZCZP is essential for the success of this entire SSC ecosystem. Are the exchanges and the NPOs pursuing this with the government?
Okay. So if you go to the original working group report, okay, working committee report, we actually had recommended that as a promotion for the social stock exchanges, any NGO coming on to the social stock exchange should actually be granted 100% tax exemption.
Okay, okay.
Right. And right from the beginning, we've been pushing for both CSR and ATG. Two things. On the CSR side, the recent amendments to the CSR rules, such as the escrow accounts and you have to return the funds at the end of the financial year, etc., make them very untenable to be on a stock exchange, right? It's not practically possible if you actually sit down and try and construct a zero coupon, zero principal instrument, which is in compliance with the CSR norms that exist now. It'll be very, very hard. And I don't anticipate that CSR will come onto the social stock exchange.
Yes. Can a single email and sorry.
Yeah, don't go ahead. Go ahead, Doctor.
Thank you. Can a single email and phone number be used for registration of multiple NPO?
Registration, yes. I don't think there's a problem there. I'll have to check because I'm not sure if listing portal can link to multiple organizations. But regardless, once you register, you'll need to provide an independent compliance officer by organization.
Yes, please.
You shouldn't be doing this in the first place.
Registering in stock exchange is good for impact and donors perspective. However, from the beneficiary perspective, it can be tend to trading of funds since they don't know much about it, but know that stock exchange is for trading and speculation. Please guide how to explain this to the community or the beneficiary if asked.
See, it's a good question, and part of the capacity building fund is actually dedicated for education of the community and the donors. So hopefully as a part of that, this question will get answered.
Yes, sir. Minimum donation amount of rupees 2 lakhs for a retail investor is a bit high. It may deter people who are willing to donate lesser amount. Why is this minimum fixed? I mean, that's it.
So SEBI has the concept of a non-institutional investor. So SEBI basically has a classification which says if you can put in 2 lakh rupees, then you know the risks involved in your putting in that money, right? And therefore they put in that 2 lakh. That's an artificial limit. We've been pushing them to lower the limit because I completely agree. It will become a deterrent. And hopefully in time we will see that that is coming down. Absolutely.
Okay, sir. Why would investors be interested in investing in FPEs? What could be the plus point for them?
Investors, FP is a for-profit enterprise, right? It will generate profits. Its value will go up with time. In addition to, it will generate a financial return because the share price should go up. It's like why you would invest in any other enterprise.
Sure. So these are the questions that we had in the chat box. Any guest in the audience wanting to ask any question, please raise your hand. Yes, Mr. Balakrishnan, you have a question there. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Gupta.
Yes,
A
sir.
quick but a little elaborate question, which is not a little transactional, which is a little broad-based. So we all know that Section 8 companies currently are also able to source funds from the stock exchange. They can also go for equity or other funds through the stock exchange. But for some reason, they are not. Are the reasons same, or are the reasons a kind of a deterrent for the new concept of social stock exchange coming up? Or will it be right to apprehend that the same reasons could be the reasons why it could be a showstopper for the whole concept?
A Section 8 company is a company constituted by shares and can, in theory, list equity on the stock markets, right? That's the basic concept. However,
Yes.
a Section 8 company is also restricted by the Companies Act that it cannot distribute any benefits or any dividends to its shareholders, right? And I think that is the reason why you don't see any listings happening of Section 8 companies. It has nothing to do with the social stock exchange.
Okay. So the reasons for which they are not listing, or reasons for which they are not raising funds, could not be the reasons why for-profit stock social enterprise or NPO would not list themselves.
I thought I just answered that, but I'll try again. So to my mind, the reason why a Section 8 company is not listed today on the stock exchange is that the structure of a Section 8 company does not allow distribution of dividend, right? And therefore, there's no perceived future income stream that is coming to a shareholder. And therefore, there is no liquid market for a Section 8 company on the stock exchange, right? The reasons for that have nothing to do with social development.
Okay, fine. Thank you, sir. Madam Divya, you had a question?
Hi.
Yes,
yeah,
ma'am.
we are a Section 8 company as well. I was trying to understand. We did try to, go follow the procedures from the NSE website to try registering. So I just heard you explaining, Section 8 companies are not being listed. So I didn't understand it, but I did not quite grab, what that was. About completely. Could you please brief it again?
Yeah, sure. I think for the purposes of our discussion, Dr. Gupta, if you're okay with this,
sir. Yes,
I think we should ignore that question that was asked, because to be honest, it had nothing to do with the social stock.
Absolutely.
Divya ji, there is nothing stopping you from registering on the social stock exchange. Please go right ahead.
Right, okay.
Thank
you. Okay. Like I said, you can come to the BSE website, and or you can go to NSE. That's also fine.
Sure.
And you can register yourself.
Yes, Madam Khushbu Agarwal, your question, please.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, I have a question. Like, if some NGO it is engaged in community specific, like for Hindu or some Muslim, like, so they can also register or list on social stock exchange, or is there any restrictions on that?
I think the current interpretation is that you may risk getting classified as a religious oriented organization, and therefore you may not be able to register.
Right. It's clearly coming out here in the barred organizations. Any more questions, please, from the audience?
Ritika, Dr. Gupta, Ritika has her hand raised.
Yes, please. Yes, Ritika,
yes,
please
good
go
afternoon,
ahead.
sir.
Yes, madam.
Yes, sir. Actually, my question is, why would someone be interested in investing in FPEs and not in any other company? FPEs may be socially doing well, but they may not be as good in getting the better returns. So, what would attract the investors?
There is a class of investors called impact investors, which typically invest in socially oriented commercial enterprises. Okay. And typically, these investors are not looking for a multi-bagger kind of issues, right? They are looking for a vehicle that will not only help them achieve the social goals that they have, but also provide a financial return. So like a hybrid vehicle. And therefore, there are people, or even today, putting in money in for-profit enterprises. It's just that it's not happening on the stock exchange.
That's right.
And therefore, it's not accessible to the wider investor pool. By putting it on the stock exchange, you're actually making it accessible to the wider pool. Yeah.
Yes.
So the people who have broader vision to life, I mean, these kind of investors are interested.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we just have a few minutes left to close this very, very interesting and knowledgeable session. Any more questions from audience, please? Last question, probably. Yes, Divya ma'am, you have a question?
Yes, sir. Can I know what is material litigation? Like, I don't know the definition, but I just wanted to understand how does this apply to the NPO when we are registering for the SSC. What are all the things we should keep in mind when we are considering material litigation?
Sorry, I missed the first sentence. आपकी आवाज break कर रही थी, Divya ma'am. Can you repeat the
Sorry.
first?
Am I audible now?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Yes. So I wanted to know what is material litigation. Like, I do understand the definition of it, but I just want to understand it on the context of now we applying for the SSC, like the registration process. How does it? What are all the considerations we have to take in when speaking about material litigation?
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of examples. So
Yeah.
as an example, a litigation that may result in suspension of your 12A ATG. As an example, it may result in either imprisonment or legal action being taken against the organization or its office bearers, right? A significant tax penalty that could result in impairment of the functioning of the organization could be some examples of material litigation.
Fine, thank you. Last question from Mr. Sandeep Kothari, please. Please go ahead.
What are the avenues?
Your voice is breaking, Sandeep ji. You're not clear.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah, so my question is, the organization decides to go with ZCB.
Not able to understand, not very clear, sir. Your voice is not clear.
Okay, I will just type it in the chat.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
I have a small clarification.
Yes,
The
please.
Section 8 companies cannot share the dividend, right? In similar manner, for-profit enterprises, can they share? Because what you get in return is only social dividend. Very purpose of establishing this stock exchange, social stock exchange, is to float companies or organizations where the return is only in the form of social dividend. Can for-profit enterprises share any return?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Dr. Gupta, if you did, you want
Probably
to
the question was that CSR, I mean, Section 8 companies cannot distribute profits. So FPs would be allowed to distribute profits to their investors?
Yeah, of course. FPs are for-profit enterprises. Section 8.
So like any other corporate entity in a
Yeah.
usual manner, they
Yeah.
can also distribute profits here. I think that's where we take this opportunity to hugely thank Mr. Hemant Gupta, head of BSc SSC, for joining us and providing to us huge information and interacting with our members, clarifying their various queries. And we also thank the guests who are present here in this interactive session being organized by ICMAI Social Auditors Organization. Whatever further queries the members may have, you can please write to me. I will get in touch with BSc SSC and get you the clarification, any further clarification that you may have going forward. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Mr. Gupta, for your time and for your very, very valuable input. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Namaskar. Thank you.